Okay, so sixth graders at home, we're going to start with our keyboard unit this week, reading notes on the staff, and then translating that over to an actual musical keyboard. I'm going to show you how you can use your Chromebook as a virtual keyboard at home in case you don't have an actual piano keyboard at home, and also share with you a packet of music once we get through the next couple of weeks. So in your Schoology dashboard, if you go to this folder, you should see this folder that says Keyboard Unit January 2021. And in there, there's this packet, how to read music, definitions to help you learn. So I'm going to be going through most of that. So if you want to follow along with your packet, you will need a pencil or pen because and you will want to try to print this out. It's only 3 pages long if you can, because I actually want you to practice drawing some treble clefs and drawing some bass clefs. You can do them on your Chromebook screen, but it would be good to actually practice them on a piece of paper. Okay, so I'm going to switch to a little bit different look, but it's the same thing that you are doing in this packet. All right. So this we talked about before when we were doing some rhythms. We talked about bar lines and we talked about measures and how they allow us to separate music into sections. So these are our bar lines and the measures of the spaces in between. So we did that when we did our rhythm unit. Now we're going to talk about the clefs. Okay, clefs are used to tell us where the notes are found on an actual music staff. All right, so this is called a treble clef. Now the word treble actually means high, and so on your TV at home or on a stereo system or something like that, there's probably some kind of a control that turns up the treble sound, and those are the high pitched sounds that you hear. There's also a control that turns up the bass sounds, and those are the low sounds. Okay? Treble clef instruments are instruments that play higher notes, like flutes, clarinets, piccolos, saxophones, instruments like that. So their music will be written on the treble clef. When we talk about people's voices, usually the sopranos and altos, the girls' voices are written in treble clef, and the men's voices, baritone or tenor and bass, are written in bass clef. Okay? So the treble clef is this S-shaped symbol that appears at the beginning of music to tell us that we are in treble clef, and it signifies that the notes will be played with the right hand. And we'll get to that later. The piano keyboard actually gets divided in the middle, and part of it you play with your right hand and part of it you play with your left hand. And so the notes that you play with your left hand are written in the treble clef, and the notes that you would play with your left hand are written in the bass clef. Okay? This is important. It's also sometimes called the G clef. That's another name for it. So I'm going to add some lines here to my staff and show you how the treble clef is drawn. Now you can do this several different ways, all right? You don't have to be fancy about making parts of the line thicker and thinner and putting this big ball down here on the bottom. So some people will draw just a straight line down the middle and then add this curled part to it. Some people will do the left side of it and then add the right side to it. Some people will start here and do the circle and then come down and around. And some people will start here at the bottom and go up above the staff and come back down and circle around. The important part about a treble clef is this. We're going to make sure that this part of it circles around this line, around the second line. And the reason we do that is because the notes that are found on this line is the note G. That's also why it's called the G clef. It tells us where G is located on the staff. Okay? So on your own, take a little bit of time to practice drawing some treble clefs. Just make sure you don't draw them backwards. If your clef looks like this, then it's going the wrong way. It's going backwards, all right? This opening needs to be facing to the right and make sure that this circles around this second line on the staff, okay? All right, I'm going to erase that and move on to our next slide. So bass clef, this is going to be very confusing for you when we first talk about this, and hopefully it'll make sense when I get to the second part of it. So the bass clef is a little bit different looking symbol. It's kind of a backward C-shaped, I say it looks like an ear, that appears before the first bar line. It appears at the beginning of the music, and it indicates that the notes on this staff are going to be played with your left hand on the piano. Now I'm going to add this in. I don't know why they didn't put this here, but it's also called, oops, let me open my writing tool again. It's also called the F clef. The treble clef was called the G clef. The bass clef is sometimes called the F clef. And the reason is that when we draw the bass clef, okay, again, you don't have to be fancy about it. It's just this curl. And then the important part are those two dots. All right? And the two dots circle around the fourth line. They circle this line. So there's a dot here and a dot. Let me move this out of the way. We'll add our highlighter. There's a dot here and a dot here, and they circle around this line. And that's because the note that's found on that line is an F. So the F clef, or the bass clef, tells us where the note F is. All right? And you can practice on your own drawing some bass clefs. Again, it's just this curly thing with two dots, and the two dots have to be around the fourth line. All right? So I'm going to clear this out and move on to the next part. So when we put it together, we get what's called the grand staff, and we use that for piano music, where the treble clef is on the top. Oops, let me go backwards. The treble clef is on the top, and the bass clef is on the bottom. That's our grand staff, and we can write all of our piano music on it. Now there are some important points on this page, okay? So one of them is that the group of 5 lines, which we call a staff, can also be called a ledger. A ledger is just a group of lines that we help to organize information. That's important because we're going to do something, we're going to use something that has to do with the word ledger in just a minute, all right? And then the spaces in between the 5 lines, so we have 5 lines and 4 spaces, all right? And they create the staff, and then our pitches that are in music are A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Those are the only notes that we use in music. We don't use H's or any other letters. So this is true worldwide. You know, we've talked about that before, that music is a universal language. Everybody in the world reads music the same way, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. They all have the same place on the staff, and they all look alike no matter what language people speak. The actual music looks alike, okay? The staff with the treble clef combined with the bass clef make up what we call the grand staff, okay? So, and that's what a grand staff looks like. And that's typically how sheet music is for pianos, right? So I'm going to move along, and this is where things may get a little confusing for you, but hopefully you'll be able to stay with me, okay? And if you're really confused about it, just send me a message on Schoology, and we can do a Zoom, and I can help you through this. So how to read music, the pitch or the tone. So when we talk about the treble clef staff, or the G clef, it tells us where G is located. Okay? So this circle that comes around here circles this line, and that means that this note is G. All the musical pitches go in order alphabetically. When you get to G, you start over again with A. So if I go up in music, if this is G, the next note is A, the next note is B, the next note is C, the next note is D, the next note is E, The next note is F, and I can continue on past there, which we'll see in a minute. If I go down from there, I'm going to go backwards through the alphabet. So if this is G, this note is F, this note is E, this note is D, this note is C. Specifically, this is called middle C. Now, you may have learned in elementary school that the names of the lines are E, G, B, D, F. And you probably learned something like every good boy deserves fudge, every good boy does fine. I heard a new one the other day, Elvis's guitar breaks down Friday, which is a new one. So any way you can remember the order of those notes, E, G, B, D, F, is fine. The names of the spaces, the notes in the spaces are F, A, C, E, and that's easier to remember because it spells the word face. Or you can just go in order, line, space, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and they'll always be in order. So that's where the notes come from on the staff. So anytime this note is in a song, it's always F. Anytime this note is in a song, it's always C. They're never going to move from a different place as long as we see this treble clef at the beginning. Okay, I'm going to erase that screen. Go to the next one, and this is really going to confuse you. Okay, and sorry about that, but that's part of understanding music. And hopefully, if you hang with me, you'll kind of understand it a little better on the next slide that I'm going to do. So on the bass clef staff, these two dots tell us that the note on this line is an F. And we do the same thing. We go up or down following the alphabet. So if this is F, this note is G, this note is A, this note is B, this note is C, and specifically it's middle C. If I go down, if this note is F, this is E, this is D, this is C, this is B, this is A, this is G. In bass clef, they'll never change. They're always going to be in that same place. So that note's always going to be C in bass clef. This note's always going to be B or F in bass clef. Okay? So, one more slide. This is why that happens. And it's a little bit confusing, but hopefully you'll understand why it is and why we spend most of our time just really dealing with treble clef. So I'm going to draw my grand staff. I'm going to put my treble clef here. I'm going to put my bass clef here. And I'm going to start with note G, which is right here, and go G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and I can continue going up from there too. I can add what are called ledger lines. They're little pieces of the staff that make the staff go higher. So my next note would be A, another ledger line and a note sitting on it would be B, two ledger lines would be C, three ledger lines would be D, or two ledger lines with a note on top of it would be D, and three ledger lines would give me E. I can keep going higher and higher and higher as I need it. If I come down from there, okay, so we'll start with G over here. Here's G, here's F, here's E, here's D, and here's that middle C that we talked about before. I'm going to come over here to my bass clef staff, and I'm going to start on F, and I'm going to go down from here. So this is F, this is E, this is D, this is C, this is B, this is A, this is G, this is F. If I add a ledger line underneath the staff, this is E, and so on and so forth. Okay? Now you may be confused by the fact that This note in bass clef is F, but in treble clef it's D. The reason why the notes are in a different place is if I count up from F, here's a G, here's an A, here's a B, and here's a middle C. These two notes are actually the same key on the keyboard. They're near the middle of the piano, and they're in the middle between the two staffs. Okay? So if I start on, I'm going to start on this lowest note, and as I go up these notes, you're going to hear that it's one continuous line. So way down here on this low E, I'll turn my piano on. Here's my low E. So I'm going to go E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, middle C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. It's all one continuous line. And the note that connects them together is right here in the middle, is middle C. Okay? So what happens is the notes end up in a different place on the bass clef than they do on the treble clef. And the reason is because we have to continue with the piano keyboard in one complete movement. All right? Now our focus is going to be on the treble clef and on the notes that are on the treble clef staff. That's really what we're going to focus in on. If you are in band and you play one of the low instruments like trombone or tuba or something like that, you're probably familiar with the bass clef. But for most people, when we're talking about melodies of songs, we're only going to be really talking about the treble clef. So that's what we're going to focus in on. Okay? So read through that whole packet, practice drawing some treble clefs and bass clefs. I'm going to create another video for you guys with a worksheet that we're going to do, and then next week we'll actually start looking at reading some music and writing out the names of the notes and then how to translate that to a piano keyboard and actually play the song on a keyboard. All right? Have a good weekend. Stay healthy.